recess. It looks like the weather's getting a little iffy out there, so let's get this show on the road. We're back from recess. I don't think I had to do that, but we did anyway. It's come to my attention after we recessed that because we adopted rulemaking in the last bill, we actually have to send it to GovOps. So I'm going to move to take House File 1414 as amended and move it to government operations so they can look at rulemaking. So that's my motion. Any discussion to that motion?
I'm voting for all these people.
Okay. You're gonna press all the buttons. So all those,
The voice, huh?
all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Absolutely no.
House File 1414 as amended is moved to government operations. All right, and I know we have some students in the audience that need to get back to school, so I think we're going to do a little quick change on the testimony, and we're going to move to House File 1204, and we have Representative Moeller pinch hitting for Representative Pryor because she's out on a field healing with early childhood. So we just have people all over the state. Representative Moeller, would you like to move your bill before the committee?
Yes, Madam Chair, so moved.
All right, so House File 1204 is before us. Representative Moeller, would you like to proceed with testimony?
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair and members. So this is Representative Pryor's bill, House File 1204, and this bill requires the Department of Education to do a number of things to support schools as they work to end sexual harassment and sex discrimination. So just briefly, the Department of Education will be required to provide leadership, consultation, and technical assistance to districts on the responsibilities of district Title IX coordinators. And they'll also be required to train Title IX coordinators on sexual harassment and sex discrimination laws. This bill has bipartisan support, and there is some additional information in your packet, some statements from survivors, and then I believe a letter from the Hopkins School District. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it over to my testifiers.
Yes, please state your name for the record and proceed.
Madam Chair and members of the House Education Policy Committee, thank you for taking the time to hear our bill today. My name is Jessica Melnick. I'm a senior at Hopkins High School and the founder of Girls United MN, an organization that strives to empower and inspire the next generation of young leaders. Last year, we worked on the sex trafficking education legislation that was incorporated into the omnibus bill. Our next goal was to address sexual harassment in Minnesota schools. This was an issue that sadly too many of my peers and I were familiar with. In 8th grade, there was a group of boys who berated me with comments which at first did not seem to bother me. The boys told me and many of my peers that I only got good grades in geometry because I would stay after school and measure the circumference of my teacher's penis with my mouth. They would walk up to random boys in class and tell them that I wanted to have sex with them. My face would often turn red and I would tell them that their actions were not appreciated, but to no avail. This was all happening in the backdrop of having my house broken into while I was home alone with my younger sister. I was dealing with severe PTSD, and school was already a struggle. Somehow the boys had found out about this and started to tell everyone that the person who broke into my house had also raped me, and I was now pregnant. I missed 3 weeks of school in 8th grade because the anxiety of going to school was so debilitating. I felt as though I was left with no choice but to stay home. These boys continued to come up to me in the hallway and in class and would stroke my stomach. When their actions were reported, all the school did was call their parents and threaten to take more serious action if they did not stop. I still had to continue to be in classes with them and was shunned by many in my grade for having spoken up about what had happened. I was told to not talk about it, but the boys were given no such instructions because within the course of a day, my peers had antagonized me for reporting the boys. My teachers were also unprepared to mitigate the effects of this situation in my classes. 4 years later, I now know that this situation was not handled properly. The staff at the Sexual Violence Center introduced us to Title IX, which at first confused us. After all, we were able to play the same sports as our male counterparts. We soon learned that Title IX also protects students from sexual violence because the presence of it obstructs our right towards receiving an education that is equal regardless of sex. We contacted some of our friends and other school districts, but they too were unaware that these protections existed. Right now, our Title IX coordinators are not equipped to properly prevent, investigate, and remedy the effects of the hostile environment that these actions create. When I reported in 8th grade, I didn't even know that there was a Title IX coordinator. I was never given the option to talk to the coordinator, nor were my parents. We combed through the Minnesota Student Survey data to find that roughly 25% of ninth grade females who took the survey in 2016 reported that they received unwanted sexual comments, jokes, or gestures in the past month. Sexual violence exists in K-12 schools, and we need to put K-12 on the same platform that this same legislature put higher ed on when they created a Title IX coordinator position at the Office of Higher Ed. This bill creates a position at the Department of Education that will provide technical assistance and training to Title IX coordinators on their requirements. This bill does not increase the workload for school districts, as the districts are already required to do this under federal law. Rather, this bill will act as an aid to Title IX coordinators across the state so that they can better protect us, ensuring our right to an education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Melnick, and I think everybody here at the table wants to say that, would agree with me that I'm so sorry that happened to you. Next testifier, please state your name for the record, and proceed.
Good afternoon. My name is Salma Saeed, and I'm a senior in high school. Throughout my education, I have encountered many instances of sexual harassment, but I'm here to speak about my concern with the profound number of instances of it in elementary schools. My younger sister is 10 years old and is in the 5th grade. Earlier this year, her peers lifted her shirt and exposed her chest to her classmates. She immediately reported the situation to her teacher, and it was not taken seriously. There is something wrong with our culture when a young girl getting exposed on a playground is written off as nothing serious. And this incident isn't the first of its kind. A good friend of mine recounted her sister coming home upset because her breast had been poked at. Unfortunately, unlike my sister, she didn't report it because she was afraid, because she is young and didn't know how, and because she had a sense nothing would be done. This attitude needs to change, and it is why we are here today. I'd also like to point out that taking off of a hijab is a form of sexual harassment, an unwanted, unwelcome form of physical contact, and one of the most humiliating things that can happen to a Muslim girl. No student, especially an elementary school student, should have to know how to advocate for herself. That is the school's job. It is critical that all educators K through 12 are fully trained to handle these situations, especially for our most vulnerable students. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for hearing our bill today.
Thank you, Ms. Said, and thank you for sharing your story. Representative Mueller, would you have any further comments? And then we'll go to see if well, first, is there anybody else in the audience? We have about less than 5 minutes. Anybody else in the audience wish to say anything else? I know that you've provided written testimony, and thank you so much. So Representative Mueller, and then we'll go to questions at the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and I just wanted to recognize the other group of students here from the Girls United group. There's quite a large number of them in the audience today, and we really appreciate you all being here and the advocacy work that you're doing around the Capitol. We're really happy to see all these young people here today, so thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mueller. Members, any questions at the table?
I just have a
Representative Hewitt.
Madam Chair, the first testifier, and I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Ms. Melnick.
Ms. Melnick, could you repeat the percentage that you used there on how many people?
Madam Chair, Representative Hewitt, it was roughly 25% of ninth grade females.
Representative Hewitt, follow up?
So it was 25% of ninth grade females. Do you feel that's a low estimate yourself, or?
Ms. Melnick?
Madam Chair, I think that's probably fairly accurate. It might be a little bit higher.
Representative
Thank
Hewitt?
you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Erickson.
Madam Chair, this is not a question. This is a question to you.
Yes.
Shouldn't this go to government operations because of the collaboration that goes on in Clause 2?
Did Representative Erickson, did you say clause, where?
In Clause 2, there's a collaboration with state experts, including the Minnesota Department of Health Sexual Violence Prevention Unit, the Department of Human Rights, to establish these model protocols. So I would think that government operations would want to see this because of that clause.
We're just checking here. Why don't we see if there's any further questions? We're just checking to see. I don't think it's a mandatory referral because of that clause, because it's not causing rulemaking or creating a task force. But Representative Freiberg, Chair Freiberg hasn't spoken to me. I know we are sending it to Ways and Means, so it does have further stops. Did anybody else, Representative Erickson, you have followed?
Well, Madam Chair, if it goes to Ways and Means, I hope that someone on that committee will address the fact that I think when we do collaborations among these different organizations, that government operations at least used to like to look at the bill.
All right, thank you, Representative Erickson. Just a moment. Thank you, Representative Erickson. We were just looking at an email that Chair Freiberg had sent to all the CAs, what his guidelines were to send it to his committee, and this doesn't fall onto it, but I'll make sure I follow up with them. Any other further questions? All right, then. Representative Mueller, I renew your motion to send, sorry, we have to take a vote. I renew my motion for House File 1204 to go to the Ways and Means Committee. Any further discussion on the motion? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion's approved. House File 1204 is on its way to Ways and Means. So we have the next bill up. Representative Herr, House File 1904. Or 1004, sorry. 1094. I'll find, third time's charm. Members, thank you for keeping me on track. So Representative Herr, would you like to move House File 1094? Actually, let me see here. So it's the intention of the chair to lay this over. So Representative Herr, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to lay over House File 1094 for possible inclusion.
Thank you, Representative Herr. Why don't you go ahead and proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So today we're here to talk about House File 1094, and this relates to mental health education. And I just wanted to share a little bit about the history and the background of this particular bill. That right now in health classes, they don't always include mental health education. There was legislation passed in 2013 that encouraged school districts and charter schools to incorporate mental health curriculum into their health curriculum and programming for students in grades 6 through 12. To support this effort, this legislation from 2013 also encouraged the Commissioner of Education, alongside the Department of Human Services and other mental health organizations, to develop age-appropriate mental health curriculum for Minnesota schools to utilize. The Commissioner of Education was also encouraged to provide a directory of resources for planning and implementing mental health instruction. After 6 years, it's time for the legislature to take another step. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 10 and 17, with an underlying mental illness being present in 90% of the youth who have completed suicide. Encouraging schools to begin mental health instructions as part of students' health class starting at 4th grade versus the 6th grade will give more kids the language to talk about mental health, recognize the signs of mental illness, and better understanding of when they need to reach out to an adult for support. School districts want to do more to meet the mental health needs of their students. While House File 1094 does not require local school districts to provide mental health services, it does require the Commissioner of Education to provide school districts with age-appropriate mental health curriculum, including a requirement to include resources on suicide and self-harm. This will give our school districts and charter schools access to the tools they need to better integrate mental health into their existing health curriculum. And I just want to note that, I did some research before bringing this bill forward, and I wanted to see what kinds of programs or what kinds of language is around mental health. And in Section 120B, which talks about curriculum assessment, that what you have here in front of you in House File 1094, Section 120B.21, this is really the only language that talks about this. And all we're doing is asking for some small adjustments, from changing this from 6th grade through 12th grade to start at 4th grade, to have the effective dates actually listed in here, and then also just to include resources on suicide and self-harm prevention. And so with that, what I'd like to do is, with your permission, Madam Chair, to turn it over to my first testifier.
Thank you, Representative Herr. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you. Sue Abderholden, Executive Director of NAMI Minnesota. So we were actually no surprise, behind the 2013 legislation because we really wanted to make sure that students also knew what was going on. And what we found actually is that when we looked at the national standards on health curriculum, they did include mental health, but only 3 small activities. And so after this legislation was passed, we actually did the work for the department and actually identified all the different classes that were available. To our knowledge, it never really got sent out. We did try to send it out to different school districts so that they would know what was happening. And many of them were free, actually. So there is one that was actually developed by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention that was around mental health and emotional health. There was another one by the U.S. Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health. Actually, the National Institute of Mental Health created the Science of Mental Illness to help students understand the brain and how it works. There was also one produced by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, on alcohol literacy. We actually went ahead, our national office has a program called Ending the Silence, where we train our staff in this program. They go out with a young adult who lives well with their mental illness and teaches. It's a 1-hour class that can be part of a health class. Last year, NAMI reached 9,000 students. And what we found was incredible. The students really reacted well to this. Some of the comments, we do an evaluation, of course, because we had grant money to do this. One of them said, "Now I know where to get help if needed." Another said, "Parents of children with mental health disorders should take this class too." I have some mental illnesses, and it's good to know you're not alone. I just like how it explains that everyone goes through things like this. These things are real, and we should stop pushing them to one side. I really like the personal story. It was good to see how what I had just learned looked like in real life. I saw that some things you talked about were things that I have, and this was very helpful. The warning signs of suicide, I can help my friends find the help that they need. And as someone with diagnosed mental health problems, I've heard a lot of conversations on the topic. This was the most accurate, accessible presentation I have seen. So we really do think it's important that we send this information out, that the department really be, kind of hold their feet to the fire in a sense, saying, pull these, and this we did back in 2014, so this was a long time ago. I'm sure there's more curriculum that's been developed. One of the things I want to mention, though, is that in the governor's budget, there is actually funding for mental health education for students, particularly around suicide prevention. And in there, that you have to use an evidence-based practice. Now, when you're talking generally about emotional health and mental health, that's fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be an evidence-based practice. But when it comes to suicide prevention, it has to be. Because what you don't want to do is to say the wrong things that then promotes contagion. And so in the governor's budget, they have in there that it would have to be an evidence-based practice. We know that sometimes schools, because of, perhaps a tragedy that happened in their community, a parent wants to come in and share their child's story. That's really not helpful because often, people are sharing the details of the story. When you share the details, that's not a good thing. So as we move forward, we want to make sure that it's just not any random thing that someone finds off of Googling, mental health education or suicide prevention, but there really is good research behind what types of curriculum is being developed and recommended to make sure that we're doing the right thing by our students. So we obviously very much support this bill. I will say that just yesterday, Illinois, their education committee actually passed a mandate for mental health education. Virginia has also passed a mandate, and New York just within the last year. So we're starting to see this happen. I know we don't like mandates in Minnesota very much, but I think this is at least a really good step forward, and I would certainly urge your support, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Abner-Holden. Anybody else in the audience? I think we'll go to members' questions. Members, anybody have questions? Representative Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you for the testimony. It certainly is an area that we need to be concerned about. And I do appreciate the passion that Ms. Aberholm, how do you say it?
Abder-Holden.
Abder-Holden.
It just looks scary.
I had a whole language when I was in elementary, so I always have a problem with phonics. But anyway, I just want to caution on the resources too, and I so appreciate your comments about that, because I had a secretary who went through a severe divorce, and she was suicidal, and she had a 6th grade son, and he came home one day from our public school, okay, and part of his suicide course, or they called it Death Ed 2, was to fill out his own tombstone and fill out his own obituary. Now, you may think, Glenn, you're embellishing that. I have the copies of the curriculum in my office, okay? This is in my local school district. And when she went, I went with her to talk to the teacher about it. She said, well, it was best practices, okay? So I think I've given you a copy of that in the past. And the other thing I just referenced real quick is a book co-authored by the former president of the APA, Destructive Trends in Mental Health, The Well-Intentioned Path to Harm. A lot of the modern day psychological techniques don't work, or they make things worse, okay? So let's be very careful what we bring to the students and make sure there is evidence-based and not just the word best practices tied to it. I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kunesh-Podein. Any other, Representative Tyndall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm interested in share the representative's concern about the presentation of this information throughout the curriculum. I understand that it's an issue of great sensitivity, but great importance in the lives of young people and the people they live with. I wonder if there are other states that have adopted a mandatory I think you call it mental and emotional health curriculum with attention to suicide prevention, and what it is they're using. Maybe not the specific lesson plans. That's not what I'm talking about. But maybe the research that might be published that I'd enjoy reading, and maybe other members of the committee might find helpful too.
Ms. Abner-Holden?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, Representative, I can get that from Virginia and New York because I know our NAMI affiliates there were very strongly involved. I do know you heard recently about the Cognito program. They also have an evidence-based practice for youth as well. So they do the online suicide prevention training for teachers and for youth. So that might be an option. And I know that there's a National Suicide Prevention Resource Center that also lists all of the evidence-based curriculum on suicide prevention, including educating youth. So there's some good places that we can go to check them out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Tyndall. Representative Tyndall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It just is such a sensitive issue that I need to learn more about it. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, Representative, if I might, and that's why we really want to make sure that we have the Department of Education working with the Department of Health to actually identify some of that programming. So it's not a school district, again, Googling suicide prevention and then putting something up or asking a parent who's lost a child to suicide to come and share their story, that we're really doing things that will actually raise awareness and prevent suicide.
Thank you, Ms. Abner-Holden. Representative Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and of course, Ms. Abner-Holden, thank you for your great work with NAMI. And my concern is that, was it because the verb encouraged was used that we didn't see the department step forward and you had to do all that work? I know now it's going to be a must, and that's going to make a difference, but it disappoints me that even though we go lightly on the department or otherwise by using the verb encouraged, that they don't follow through. So thank you for the work that you did. Well, I see the department's coming down. That's good to see.
Ms. Caitlin Snyder, state your name for the record.
Thank you so much. Caitlin Snyder with the Minnesota Department of Education. 2013 slightly predates the time that I was at the agency, but I was obviously listening to the testimony this afternoon and was also very concerned about what we heard about what may or I certainly believe Ms. Abner-Holden. But I do want to see what the department has done in this area and work to see what we can do to further advance this important area. And I will circle back with the committee as well.
Thank you. Representative Hewitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Herr, I am so excited that you're bringing this bill forward. Working in the emergency room and working with patients on the streets, it's amazing where kids go for their healthcare knowledge. So this is just a start. Dr. Google is not the best place for this, self-diagnosis. And then the kid that comes into the ER that we recognize that I just didn't know where to turn. And to hear that we may be able to do this in our high schools and grade schools is just exciting to me and a part of the process of maybe getting to figure this all out. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, Representative Bierman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rep. Hare, for bringing this forward. And I think at this time, with the lack of school counselors that kids have available, this is even more important to get some basis of it in the curriculum and being addressed, because sometimes it's just a matter of them being exposed to what they're thinking and know that they need some additional resources and to understand better, and that's what schools are about, is knowledge and teaching and education. I did want to go back to what you had, as you talk about suicide, which is, for kids, and we all have experiences, whether it's family or friends or neighbors, that we're seeing too much of that in this day and age, and so we need to take some steps to address that and learn how to address it both with kids and communities as a whole. And when I was growing up, there were certain things where they would try dramatically to scare you, to make you stop. Could you comment a little bit about those programs and whether some of them are still being used? I remember in high school, they used to bring a vehicle that was in an accident and put it on the school lot. And is that still effective? Or scared straight programs about sending people to jail and that would straighten them up? And can you comment on those programs?
Ms. Abner-Holden, it's a little further than what the bill, but do you brief comment or?
Madam Chairman, Representative Bierman, so I don't know if they're still used in terms of the driving and accidents and things like that. It's certainly not used in terms of suicide prevention because it just didn't work, and that's why we really caution people about having someone share their story unless they've gone through specialized training. And what we know just from our Ending the Silence program is nearly every time that we deliver that class, a student comes up to us or a teacher afterwards who's concerned about themselves or a friend, which is why we actually try to really push that any school that we go into, that the teachers have had a recent training on, for example, question, persuade, and refer, some type of suicide prevention training, so they actually know what to do when that student comes forward to them. But scaring someone straight on suicide doesn't work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abner-Holden. Any further questions? Then I renew Representative Hurd a motion to move to lay House File 1094 over for possible inclusion.
Madam Chair, can I
Sorry,
just-
final words. I'm
Yes,
so sorry, Representative Hurd.
Just a couple of quick final words that I think that sometimes we are looking at just this issue and we don't realize it seems very simple in some of the things that we're trying to do, but how expansive and how great the reach is. That there are some communities in which mental health is never talked about. In my own particular community, we don't even have a word for mental health in my community, and so their children will never get that kind of conversations or help or support from their own homes, and that we already ask so much of teachers, and I know our teachers have so much on their plates, and I really appreciate the fact that this is the one place that I feel like some of these children who may never get access to this will be the place that they do get it. And so I didn't want this to be lost on the fact that for school districts that this is not an unfunded mandate, but the fact that when they do choose to take on this work, that they are taking on additional work, and they are actually taking on our whole entire communities. And this, this mental health, regardless of where you're from or your beliefs, that it impacts us all the same. And so I appreciate that this is, there are people here doing this work and that we are moving this forward. So I do encourage that all of you help support this and moving it forward as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Hurd. I renew my motion to lay House File 1094 over for inclusion. Thank you. Representative Erickson, House File 532 next. Representative Erickson, would you like to move your bill forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do move House File 532 for possible consideration. And
Yeah.
I do have the A1 amendment.
Yes, Representative Erickson has the A1 amendment.
I move that, Madam Chair.
All right, any discussion on the amendment?
Members and Madam Chair, this is the Teacher Code of Ethics that is in this amendment being placed in the Education Code. So it's being codified. It adds a couple of standards of professional conduct, would be letter A and letter K, and then gives advice to the board to develop a process for school districts to receive complaints about teachers under this code, and then to forward those to PELSB, which is our licensing board.
So on the author's A1 amendment, do I see any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The amendment's adopted. Representative Erickson, just to let you know, the motion I'm going to be making is referring House File 532 to Ways and Means because it has to go to public safety with the new criminal statutes in there. So Representative Erickson, would you like to proceed with your testimony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members, this combination now of 532 with House File 23 is a result of some work that's been done for about the last 2 years, primarily by former Representative Jennifer Loon, Ms. Para here, who came to us from Nonpartisan House Research to help in the language area and the arrangement of the new law. Mr. Withers, of course, who works for us in our caucus, and myself. So this was in the omnibus bill that was sent to the governor last year that resulted in a veto. So this has been pretty well vetted along the way, and I present it today on behalf of our children, to protect our children. Members, I know that you have heard a lot of stories about teacher behavior and how it has impacted students. It's been in the headlines. As we know, the majority of our teachers are outstanding. They follow the code of ethics. I used to keep it in my drawer at school to remind myself what the code was so that I wouldn't be violating anything aside from my behavior. You know, there are other points in the code that are so important too, because you know, it deals with, you know, the authority that we have in the classroom. And so it was very important to me that I demonstrate that and hold true to that code. But anyway, you most recently probably heard the KSTP report that broke a couple of years ago when a woman came forth to reveal that she had been sexually molested by a teacher about 20 years before. And that became an investigation by KSTP, and I think most of us have learned about that. And that was one of the reasons that I thought it was important, as did Representative Loon and others, that we come up with some language that we could put in statute in 122A.118 and others that would require background checks, expand mandatory reporting, and do another of other proposals that really would ensure that we have our children protected under the best guidance of our teachers in the classroom. So I've asked Ms. Para to walk us through this very long proposal, 532 as amended, although I've covered the amendment, to help you understand what we have done over the last couple of years and are presenting again today.
Thank you, Ms. Para.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. And I'll walk through the bill using the section numbers in the unamended version, just to make it a little bit easier to follow. And also because I'm sometimes a little prone to using too many acronyms. HELSB is Professional Educator Licensure and Standards Board. BOSA is the Board of School Administrators. And BCA is the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. So section 1 on page 2, that eliminates language that allows HELSB and BOSA to issue a license pending the background check. Section 2, let me back up for a sec. Under current law, a teacher has to have a background check when the candidate first applies for a license, but there's no ongoing requirement for a background check. So section 2 requires that when a teacher is applying for renewal of the license, that the teacher have a new background check every 5 years if they haven't had one within those past 5 years. Section 3 amends 122A20, and subdivision 1 has the grounds for revocation, suspension, or denial of a license, and so I'll walk through the various paragraphs. Paragraph A amends the grounds on which a board may refuse to issue, refuse to renew, suspend, or revoke a license. Paragraph B amends the list of offenses where if the teacher is convicted of one of those offenses, the board must refuse to issue, refuse to renew, or revoke the license. And it also, on page 3, allows the board to refuse to issue, refuse to renew, or automatically revoke a license without the right to the hearing if a teacher has received a stay of adjudication for any offense. And there are some other provisions later on relating to stay of adjudication, so I'll talk more about that then. Paragraph C makes a change on line 29, and that allows a person whose license to teach has been revoked, not issued, or not renewed under paragraph B to petition the board to reconsider if the conviction is reversed, and that the change makes it apply to any offense, not just a conviction for child abuse or sexual abuse. Paragraph D requires PELSB or BOSA to refuse to renew or revoke the license if the teacher has engaged in sexual penetration with a student in the teacher's school. Paragraph E requires PELSB or BOSA to review and then allows the board to refuse to renew or revoke the license if the teacher has been convicted of certain offenses. And those offenses are listed on page 4, lines 16 through 20. Paragraph F requires a decision by PELSB or BOSA to refuse to issue, renew, suspend, or revoke the license to be reversed if it's not actually the teacher that is the subject of that background check, so if there's some kind of error there. Paragraph G allows a person to appeal the licensing action under the subdivision by submitting a written request with the board, and then those would go through the administrative hearing process that's available under Chapter 14. Paragraph H allows PELSB or BOSA to suspend a teacher's license pending an investigation into a report of conduct that would be grounds for revocation. Section 4 of the bill, on page 6, that adds BOSA to existing language that currently requires PELSB, that makes PELSB a mandatory reporter. And then later on page 6, it requires PELSB or BOSA to notify law enforcement authorities or the local welfare agency if the board has reason to believe a child has been maltreated. Sections 5 and 6 are really the same. Section 5 applies to continuing contract teachers, and Section 6 is for tenured teachers. But both amend the grounds on which a school board must discharge a teacher that has either a continuing contract or tenure. And it does that by modifying the list of offenses for those convictions. So it adds indecent exposure and clarifies and adds some subdivisions there. And also any other offense that's not listed in the paragraph that requires notice of a licensing action under paragraph B, which I previously went through, and 122A20. Section 7 on page 11, that requires a school hiring authority to request a criminal history background check from the BCA on all employees every 5 years. Again, as with the licensing, the school board has to run the criminal background check when the employee is first hired, but there's no requirement after that. So this adds the requirement for every 5 years unless the employees had one in the previous 5 years. And it allows the school hiring authority to pay for the background check, but does not require it. Section 8 on page 13. That eliminates language that allows a school hiring authority to hire a person pending completion of the background check. Section 9 on page 14, that amends Chapter 299C17. There's 2 sections there in that chapter, and that's the BCA chapter. So Section 9 requires the superintendent of the BCA to require court administrators to report stays of adjudication for an offense that if the person were convicted, they would have to register as a predatory offender. Section 10 requires the superintendent of the BCA to disclose stays of adjudication granted to the subject of a background check if the background check is statutorily mandated or authorized. Section 11 amends a section in Chapter 609, which is part of the criminal code, and it requires that a stay of adjudication be reported to the superintendent of the BCA. Sections 12, 13, and 14 amend mandatory reporting requirements for maltreatment of minors. So Section 12 adds the member of a board whose licensees perform work within a school facility to the list of mandated reporters. Section 13 on page 16. Thank you. On page 16 requires law enforcement authorities to inform PELSB or BOSA if they receive information that one of the board's licensees has physically abused, sexually abused, or neglected a child. Section 14, and some of these sections are a little long.
Page 23.
Page 23, thank you. So there's just one change on line 20 of page 23. What that does is it requires the commissioner to inform an appropriate licensing entity, so PELSB or BOSA, or another such board, that a report of maltreatment was received, the subject of the report, the date of the initial report, the category of maltreatment, the fact that maltreatment was not determined, and a summary of the reasons for the determination. And finally, Section 15, which is on page 25, requires a court administrator to send a copy of a school bus driver's stay of adjudication for various offenses to the Department of Public Safety and to the school districts in which the offender drives a school bus within 10 days of the stay of adjudication.
All right, thank you, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll stand for questions, but I think that the lawyer who represents the Ethics Department at PELSB, our Professional Educator Standards and Licensing Board, would like to provide some testimony. I have met with Alex Lobizi, who is the Executive Director of PELSB. I'm a former member of the old board, Board of Teaching, but we have met and we have walked through this proposal to determine that there might be some amending that we might want to do along the way. So unless
you.
there's some direct questions for me, I'd like to hear from.
No, I think that's a good idea, Representative Erickson. I think we'll have him come up, and then we also have some other testifiers, and then we'll probably go to questions. So you want to approach the...
No, it's a she.
Or she, I'm sorry. She, would you like to come up? And
Yes.
Or it may be a group, so just state your name for the record, and then you can proceed.
My name is Jim McClausich. I'm a principal in Shakopee Public Schools, and I'm a board member of PELSB.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Zoliker, and I'm the teacher ethics specialist for PELSB.
Hello, my name is Michelle Vaught, and I'm the rulemaking specialist for PELSB.
Thank you. Whoever would like to go first.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, we would like to thank Representative Erickson for her work bringing this bill forward. The Professional Educator Licensing Standards Board worked hard last session to close gaps in teacher ethics statutes and clarify and tighten statutory language. PELSB remains committed to the comprehensive and thoughtful conduct and ethics requirements for Minnesota's teachers. PELSB takes its role in teacher discipline with the utmost care, understanding our role in ensuring the safety of all Minnesota students. We also approach this conversation understanding that out of the over 120,000 licensed teachers in Minnesota, the board sees fewer than 500 cases per year, most of which are classroom management issues or misdemeanors committed prior to becoming a teacher. Teachers are good people. The conversation today focuses on a commitment to ensure the few teachers who choose unethical conduct do not fall through the cracks. We believe that Representative Erickson and other legislators share this commitment with us. We come to testify today to ensure that the changes made to the statute provide clarity to the process, close potential gaps in reporting, and strengthen the teacher discipline process for the board. PELSB board members and staff do this work daily. We offer our services to review proposals, provide recommendations, and answer questions from legislators at any time. Representative Erickson was kind enough to meet with our Executive Director, Alex Lobizi, yesterday to hear our feedback.
Thank you. Was it Vaught?
PELSB has suggested technical changes to House File 532 that provide the thorough review of teacher discipline needed, both in keeping with what we believe is the intent of the bill and also ensuring that the language remains clear and comprehensive. Our testimony today will focus only on some high-level suggestions in 3 categories. 1, background checks, 2, categories of misconduct, and 3, mandatory reporting. We have offered specific technical changes to Representative Erickson and can share them with other members of the committee upon request. PELSB supports ongoing background checks for teachers, which is addressed in Section 2 of House File 532. PELSB currently runs a full background check through the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, including fingerprints, upon initial licensure. At no other point is a teacher required to complete a background check through the state. After attempts to pass legislation last session requiring a background check through PELSB every 5 years was unsuccessful, PELSB adopted language into administrative rule authorizing PELSB to conduct background checks on licensed teachers at renewal. PELSB staff are now investigating options for ongoing background checks that do not cost teachers or districts additional fees, yet provide the full scope of the BCA check. PELSB recommends Section 2 be amended so that PELSB is able to access more comprehensive background check options. Specifically, PELSB recommends that this language be amended to specify the type of background check that should be conducted. For example, which databases should be searched without being overly prescriptive for the manner in which the study is conducted. This would allow PELSB to explore partnerships with other agencies that run real-time and ongoing background checks.
Thank you. And could you state your name for the record again and then proceed?
Maria Zoliker. PELSB believes that any sexual contact or conduct between a teacher and student is unacceptable. The board has seen cases of teachers grooming students, waiting until they are 18 years old to pursue a sexual relationship. Representative Demuth's bill, HF 491, heard earlier today, criminalizes this behavior and will greatly assist the board in taking immediate action. Some of our language changes to HF 532 reflect the language of sexual contact or conduct to ensure clarity and consistency in application. HF 532 elaborates on unethical conduct requiring the board to investigate. Currently, this already occurs through a strong teacher discipline process. However, PELSB recommends additional language that clarifies mandatory reporting requirements of state agencies, clarifies the reporting requirements of all districts, including charter schools, and clarifies the level of investigatory data shared between agencies. PELSB is not funded as an investigatory body, but instead opens inquiries that utilizes the investigatory work of law enforcement, Student Maltreatment Division of the Department of Education, county services, and school districts. Ensuring PELSB has all this information is the most effective way legislation can close loopholes and ensure unethical conduct is reviewed. The board has grouped these issues into separate amendments. We believe these amendments are key to ensuring the teacher discipline process is clear, comprehensive, and ensures the safety of students. We conclude by reminding the committee that the vast majority of teachers are ethical, committed, caring individuals. The board supports any language that helps us to process teacher discipline cases where one of those teachers makes a small mistake. We also know that strengthening and clarifying statutes to ensure comprehensive and thoughtful language will help close gaps to keep the few unethical teachers from the classroom. HF 532 starts this conversation. Please reach out to our agency for specific recommendations that achieve this intent. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there anything else that PELSB would like to add? While we have them up here, is there any quick questions from the table for PELSB, and then we'll have the other testifiers come up. Representative Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just want to thank Representative Erickson for coming forward with this bill. It's unfortunate and sad that our culture has gotten to this point, but that's where we're at. I notice on the bill there's only all Republican authors, and I would just encourage this committee to take a bipartisan approach on this and consider signing on to this bill, because I think it goes a long ways towards addressing some of the concerns we've heard here in the community, whether it's sexual harassment or some of the other things we have testifying for. So I hope we could make this a bipartisan effort.
Representative Gruenhagen, did you actually have a question for PELSB? That's what I thought you were raising your hand for.
I forgot the question. No. No, I just wanted to thank them for their testimony and work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody have a question for PELSB? Representative Sandell? And then
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the attention and the work on this bill as well, Representative Erickson. Thank you. But there are a couple things that I'm not clear on. I don't understand or I don't know what a stay of adjudication is and how it might be enforced and under what circumstances it might be established or enforced. Can you tell me what that is, please?
Yeah, the stay of
Representative Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The background studies, stay of adjudication would be available if the person, if convicted, would require a predatory offender registration, and that would authorize Pellsby to revoke. So a stay of adjudication comes from the court.
Would any of the, Pellsby like to answer to that? I know that was one of your areas that the criminal, or no, lawyer, anybody?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is something that we are willing to work with the committee on. Those are technical changes that we would love to get our input, give our input on. And so that's something that we would love to talk about at a later time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And then I think Ms. Para is willing to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Sandell, a stay of adjudication, I'm no criminal law expert, but sometimes a defendant will plead to an offense rather than going through with the trial, and will get a stay of adjudication. So it's kind of like a suspending the process, and it's not a conviction. It is less than a conviction, but the person has still been charged.
And usually what comes with that is things that they have to do to make sure that they behave. For the next, there'll be a period of time that the stay is enforced.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I see some nods at the table,
I
Representative.
just want to make sure I understand. So we're talking about an action which is of some sort of sexual predication. Is that
Ms.
is that
Para?
correct?
Madam Chair, Representative Sandell, yes. It's for offenses where somebody would have to register as a predatory offender if they were convicted. That's what that specific provision applies to.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up as well. Representative Erickson, would this refer to contractors, for example, coaches who may not have a teaching license, and how would that happen? And does it also refer to, would it also deal with administrators? Though I know that the bill is dealing with a teacher's licensure. What about contractors, coaches, and administrators who might be in relationship with, in contact with students?
Representative Erickson.
Madam Chair and Representative, if they're licensed through the Professional Licensing Board, then this law is applicable to them. There is a provision for school bus drivers at the end.
I saw that. Thank you.
Because they have direct contact with students. Of course, I think yes, Representative Damoth's, I think, bill did cover some of this.
Yeah, Representative Erickson's
So
correct.
I'm going to ask Ms. Para to comment on that.
Ms. Para.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. There is a provision that applies to the background check that the school boards require. And that applies to, I believe that applies to all employees, yeah. For all individuals offered employment in the school district. So that would include everybody.
Ms. Para, is that just on the background check, though, or is it on the rest of the bill?
It's in the, so it's on page 12. It amends section 123 VO3. So anytime the school board, so the school district is going to hire somebody, they would have to they already have to do a background check. But now, every 5 years, any employee would have to have a background check.
So Ms. Para just deals with the background check, though? Correct.
Madam Chair, that's correct.
Thank you. Representative Sandell, does that answer your question?
Thank you. My last question is the expense that's involved in this. I'm not suggesting that anything is too expensive for this, because this is such an important responsibility of the school and the school board. But is there an estimate that of what it might cost the school board to take care of all this, to pay attention to the bill?
Madam Chair, and I think Pellsby knows what the cost is of the background check.
Would someone like to answer? Please state your name for the record.
Madam Chair, Representative, my name is Michelle Vaught. Pellsby can provide more information about how much our background checks cost applicants through our process, but each individual school district would have a different expense that for the vendor in which they use. So we are happy to follow up with you.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I don't mean to establish a cost-benefit analysis between the cost. I just wondered what the cost was, that's all. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I've got some people lining up, but I just want to do questions to Pellsby. Is that, okay. Representative Mary Kunesh-Podein?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know if this is Pelsby or Representative Erickson. But on page 4, the new language from 4.7 to 4.11, Pelsby or whichever jurisdiction is holding the teacher's license or licensure must refuse to issue, refuse, renew, revoke a teacher's license to teach if the teacher has engaged in sexual penetration as defined in sections with a student enrolled in a school where the teacher works or volunteers. And I'm just wondering about that last part, enrolled in a school where the teacher works or volunteers. What if that is happening or has happened with a student not in the school that the teacher works in or volunteers in?
Helsby? I'm going to let
Representative Erickson, you're going to
our ethics chair answer that,
Would
our
you like
ethics
to
lawyer.
state your name one more time for the record and proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maria Zoliker. Certainly, Pelsby has encountered that before where the teacher has been in a different district than the student and sexual penetration has occurred. We would review that. Even without the statutory language as it is in now, that's something that we would investigate as well. So it's not currently addressed in that section, but that's something that Pelsby does currently investigate.
Okay, one more follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, is it Salzar? Ms. Salzar?
Zoliker.
Zoliker, okay. I just elevated you to a national level, I think. So do you think that we should add language to that to be more inclusive of all teachers, no matter where they are? Or is there language in other places that would include them in that?
Thank you, Representative. I think that's something that we would maybe want to flesh out, and that would be more of a technical change that we would want to address.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, this is one section that Mr. Luisi and I talked about tightening up or at least making a little more specific. So we're going to work on that one.
Thank you, Representative Erickson. Representative Bierman, I have Representative Bierman, Scott, Christensen, Moeller, and I know we have some other people that want to testify that may help answer some of the questions you have. Are you okay with waiting? And then Pelsby will be here to answer more specific questions afterwards.
Madam Chair, my questions have been answered now.
All right, thank you. So why don't we have other folks come up and then take all the testimony, and then we can go back to questions. And then I think when we go back to questions, I have Representative Scott, Christensen, and Moeller. And I have on the list that's asked to testify, Meg Luger from Education Minnesota, Roger Aronson, and then Jim Bartholomew. So why don't we start with Meg Luger? Why don't you come forward, state your name for the record, and proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Meg Luger. I'm with Education Minnesota, and I'm also the parent of 3 children in the St. Paul Public Schools. And we are here today because we share some of the current concerns that Representative Erickson has brought forward, and I think we'd appreciate an opportunity to have a conversation with her about those going forward. But I just want to address some of our key points. And I think the place to start is probably one of the last things that Ms. Zoliker said, which is, I think, true of a lot of this bill, that the board already has the ability to review lots of stuff, and in fact, invokes that authority often and does a great job in capturing those things. And so in many respects, there are a number of aspects of this bill that are basically superfluous given the scope of the board's authority currently. But the parts where we are a little bit concerned are the areas in which the board is given jurisdiction to suspend or affect an individual's ability to teach prior to there having been an adjudication or any actual fact finding concerning what happened. And so that would be the language on lines 4.12 to 22, as well as the lines 4.27.33, and then on page 5.1 through 5.6. No question in anyone's mind that the board has the permissive ability to investigate most any things that are considered potential violations of the of the code of ethics, but the aspect in which an individual hasn't been convicted of a crime or there has been merely a report as opposed to a determination of maltreatment, giving the board the ability to remove someone's ability to teach. That's a lot of power for the government to have. And so we have some real concerns about that, where there hasn't been due process. And, one of our key concerns about lines 4.27 and 4.33 is that although an individual is given the opportunity to have a due process proceeding before the Office of Administrative Hearings, it is prior to, or it is following the board's decision to suspend or revoke. And it's my understanding that the board isn't looking for that type of authority anyway. So we don't recommend building it into law where it isn't necessary. And so coupled with that, and then the fact that we're treating stays of adjudication as equivalent to convictions, when, as Ms. Parra explained, that's not the case. Those things take place before there is a full fact-finding by a criminal tribunal of any type. That's problematic, and the same is true with a maltreatment report as opposed to a maltreatment determination. A maltreatment determination follows considerable fact-finding on the part of the Department of Ed, and we appreciate that work and think it ought to get done before there are collateral consequences from a mere report. So happy to answer any questions that folks may have, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Yes, I think we'll go on, if you stand by, and we'll have Mr. Roger Erickson, I think, was on the list.
Madam Chair, you can take me off.
Okay, thank you. And then I think.
So, Madam Chair.
Yep, Representative Erickson.
Thank you. In regard to what we just heard, those are sections of the proposal that I had great discussion with Mr. Luisi. On page 6, the maltreatment section, even the Department of Education is involved there, so that is one of the sections we're working on. And I did want to point out to you, Madam Chair and members, that on page 5, the mandatory reporting, I will be amending that to make sure we include charter schools, because it says school board right now, and school board would be suggestive of the traditional K-12 system, and we want to ensure that charter schools are also included for mandatory reporting. So some of what Education Minnesota referred to is under discussion with Pelsby.
All right.
And I appreciate that.
And then I also have Mr. Bartholomew, but I don't see him in the audience. So is there anybody else in the audience that would wish to speak for or against? I think we have some further member questions. Representative Sandell, I saw you kind of looking in after you heard the stay of adjudication. Did that answer your question a little bit better?
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Representative Bierman.
So that was kind of my question, Madam Chair, as well. And so I'm just trying to figure out with what we just heard from the testifier that her concerns of 5.1 to 5.6. Representative Erickson, is that something that will be further addressed as well?
Representative Erickson.
Would you repeat that, please?
So 5.1 to 5.6, sort of a guilty until proven innocent concern. Is that going to be under further consideration as well as to the wording of that?
Madam Chair and Representative, notice that the verb is permissive. So this is for the ability for Pelsby to see that there's been a stay of adjudication if need. So I think this is a section that'll be under review again, but.
Okay. Madam Chair, that's the only.
I think I know what your question is. Your question is dealing with line point 5.4. Is that it? Oh, no, you're on page 6.
Page 5.
Oh, yeah, page 5. The teacher's license is suspended until the licensing board completes its disciplinary investigation and determines whether disciplinary action is necessary. Is that the question you're raising?
Yes, Representative Bierman.
Madam Chair.
On that, those two lines?
Yes.
Representative Erickson.
I don't have that marked as something that we're going to review, but we certainly can. You know, this has been the process that was used when I served on the board, that while we conducted our investigation, the teacher's license was suspended until we had completed the investigation. I served on the disciplinary committee,
I'm
and so
seeing some shaking
that
heads. Does
happens.
someone want to come up and comment on that, or? Sorry, I'm just watching all these heads up. We just want to be clear. So I want to make sure your question's answered, Representative Bierman. So, Ms. Luker, will you state your name for the record again?
Yep, Meg Luger, Nikolai, Education, Minnesota, and thank you, Madam Chair. I have worked with teachers for, well, working on 10 years now, and it is not typical for the board to suspend a license pending an investigation. And it is also worth noting that the reference to subparagraph E that's being added includes the addition of, of more potential alleged offenses that would ordinarily not draw the same kind of flags absent this legislation. So that is not consistent with my fairly lengthy experience at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Luker. Representative Bierman, did you have further questions on this, or?
Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, not at this time. I think overall, I really like the bill, and it's good work, and I appreciate your work on this, and it's a big step to make sure that our kids are safe, and that's very important, so thank you.
Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Erickson, I just had a question about page 14, section 10. And that section is regarding the BCA, I think. No, or is this the superintendent of schools? I'm just a little confused about this section and what this is intending to do. So if you could just help me with that, that would be great.
Representative Erickson.
Madam Chair and Representative, do you want both 9 and 10 reviewed, or just one of those?
Just section 10, please, starting at 14.14.
I'm going to ask Ms. Parrott to comment on section 10.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Representative Moeller, Section 10, yes, this amends 299C is the BCA chapter. So superintendent here refers to the superintendent of the BCA. And this requires that the BCA disclose to someone that applies for a background check. So in this case, that would be school board or the PELSB, the stays of adjudication that were granted to the subject. So that would be to the candidate, to the teacher or employee that is the subject of the background check.
So, yeah, so just to be clear here, but this isn't limited to schools. So this would be any employer in any situation that's looking at doing a background check. It would require those stays of adjudication then to be reported.
Madam Chair, Representative Moeller, this applies to any stay of adjudication for any background check that is statutorily authorized. Let me look here. Yes, statutorily mandated or authorized background study. The previous section requires courts to report stays of adjudication for offenses that would require predatory offender registration. So I think those two sections work together.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm just not clear that this is limited to the education setting. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. To me, it looks like it's much broader to other employers, perhaps in other circumstances, because it's an amendment to 299C.17. And I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Ms. Parrott.
Madam Chair, Representative Moeller, that's correct. Nothing in section 9 or 10 is limited to the education world.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, so Representative Moeller, can you repeat that then again, too?
Yeah, so, okay, so if I'm understanding this right, Section 9 and Section 10 regarding background checks means that the BCA would be required to disclose these stays of adjudication to any employer that's authorized by law to conduct a background check. It's not just if it's a school district, it would be any employer.
Okay, thank you, Representative Moeller. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this mic working, by the way? Oh, it just always sounds really stuffy over here where I am. So, I think a couple of the issues on the stays of adjudication, to answer your question, a couple of years ago, there was a news story done on a school bus driver, and I believe it was up in Blaine, and he had a stay of adjudication, and I think, and Representative Moeller can correct me if I'm wrong as a prosecutor, but sometimes those are issued when there's not enough evidence to convict. Am I right about that?
Representative Moeller. Put your lawyer hat on.
I know. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, it's not necessarily there's not enough evidence, but both the prosecutor and the defense would have to agree to, it's different when we're talking about juvenile cases, but for adult cases, both the prosecutor and the defense attorney or defendant would have to agree to a stay of adjudication that the judge would grant. And there's a number of reasons why a prosecutor might do that. And one might be that they had some questions about the evidence or might think it's the appropriate thing in that case.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so what happened in that case is the school bus driver, it was learned later, after he abused a child or sexually abused a child, that he'd had the stay of adjudication on his record, but it didn't show up in any previous background checks. And so I don't know if that's the onus for why some of this is brought into this situation. But certainly due process is very important in all stages of government. It's what our Constitution, it's what our way of life here was built on. And so I would just keep that in mind as we move forward with any issue down here at the legislature, that due process is super important. And that may overflow actually into gun issues too, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Scott. I appreciate your due process, and I think that's why there's some consternation on the language on page 4 and 5 that Representative Bierman and a few of us share on that, because they're taking a license away without due process is what's written into this language. Representative Wozniak. Oh, wait, Representative Christensen. Oh, okay, Christensen. I should really look at my list, because
Okay.
it's after lunch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I'd just like to say, what I was going to say a long time ago, I was going to refer to background checks. I know, and possibly in your school too, if I had someone come into my classroom, say a writer, come into my classroom, they had to have a background check. If someone wanted to chaperone the kids to Orchestra Hall, they had to have background checks. So I think districts in general are pretty good, sometimes too good about that, where it's difficult to even get volunteers. And I like the idea about getting that second background check. That's such a good point. I know I never did a second one. I didn't do anything wrong, I promise. But, that makes perfect sense, so I really like that. And the adjudication, the stay of adjudication, and we're also on the Public Safety Committee, so I think we have to be really careful about accusing or assuming something when there's been no conviction. I just think we need to be really careful. Not that we don't possibly have to look at those things, but we have to be really, really careful about that. Okay, thanks. Good bill.
And I had Representative Hewitt and then Representative Wozniak.
Is there, Madam Chair, is there anybody from the districts in here? I just have a contract question. Quickly, my question really is so once is it common practice, because we went through this in the EMS world a few years back when we were doing our board work, and the question is once somebody loses their license, do they always lose their pay if they're in process? I'm sorry, did you ask that already?
No, I was going to, but.
Wow.
I'm waiting to see if somebody's gonna.
We're calling a friend.
We are phoning Mr. Roger Erickson to come down here and answer Representative Hewitt's question.
Madam Chair, members, I'm Roger Erickson. I represent the Secondary Principals Association. Technically, state law says that school districts can only contract with, quote, qualified teachers. A qualified teacher is one who has a license. And as you play out the various scenarios, if a teacher's been accused of, or a principal has been accused of a felony that's part of their employment, if the board hasn't gotten to the license yet, the district now has the authority under the statute to suspend them without pay pending those proceedings. It would be unusual that the licensure process would proceed so fast ahead. But in the event that happened, and we have it every once in a while where someone doesn't renew their license, so now they don't have license. Technically, we will suspend people and say, we can move to discharge you. The process may take a while and you might get that license reinstated by that time. But we're not going to pay you if you don't have the license, given that we can't contract with people who, because we can't have you teach if you don't have the license. In fact, it's an ethical issue then. As the BOSA people would tell you, it's an ethical issue for a superintendent or a principal to employ someone who doesn't have the license. So we've got a pretty good system wrapped up on if you don't have your license, you're not going to be teaching. I get that. Right.
Representative Hewitt, any?
Yep, here comes a follow-up. Come on up, board.
I'm going to have a follow-up for Mr. Erickson too on that question because it piqued my mind.
So my question to whoever wants to step up to the plate there. So in a process where you got the adjudication and things come down and you have to suspend their license until a decision is made by the board, what time frame are we looking at?
Well, Madam Chair and Representative Hewitt, that could be a rather extended time frame. What seems like lightning speed could easily be 3, 4, 5, 6 months working through the board as they try to do their due process, and they're not particularly overstaffed when it comes to their investigative resources through the Attorney General's office as well. I wouldn't be surprised at that. Maggie, what do you think?
Ms. Lugar.
Madam Chair, Representative Hewitt, that is consistent with our experience.
Representative Hewitt.
So Madam Chair, I want it to be known that we around this table, this is a top priority. This is a value of Minnesota to take care of its kids and to make sure they're safe. And I do think your comment earlier of us coming on the bill, but we also have to have due process for our people. And that's what this is about, is to make sure the check and balances are in there. Representative Erickson, this is a good bill, but it's not perfect. We're not there yet because livelihoods come into play here, people's houses come into play here, and people's reputations come into play, and we have to be very careful with this. In 5 months without a paycheck would pretty much hurt many people, so I'm a little concerned about that, Madam.
Thank you, Representative Hewitt. Representative Sandell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's also in my experience when applying for a job, there's a question frequently on the application that says, has your license ever been suspended? Now, if an individual had his license or her license suspended, but was never accused of committing the crime, would have to say yes.
Yes.
Which would, in most cases, it seemed to me, be really tough to get another job. And I like the bill, Representative Erickson, with all, except maybe 3 paragraphs. So those are my concerns, and I don't know if the next step is trying to amend the bill or just withholding support, which I hate to do, because I do like the bill.
Well, Representative Sandell.
Thank you.
We're unfortunately past amendments, and only the author's amendment was offered. But we are taking this bill will be moving to Ways and Means to go to public safety. So it is my hope, too, that more things are looked at, because I share a lot of the same concerns everyone does, because if the board can suspend a license while they're investigating, 1, that suspension then removes pay, or could. 2, that suspension, even if the board came back and said, oh, we've investigated, you're fine, that's still there, and a teacher would have to answer that.
Thank you.
And I'm seeing nodding heads. So Representative Erickson, I have only one more person on the list, Representative Wozlowick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a complicated bill. I think we all acknowledge that. And so I just have one question. I'm confused about what is referred to in this part. So page 3. Line 3.24 and 3.25, the end of that first sentence says, without the right to a hearing upon receiving a certified copy of a stay of adjudication for any offense. I guess I'm a little bit confused about what that any offense is. I know there's a lot of pieces of this bill in terms of what happens when and where. So I'm wondering if that any offense, if that's the offenses listed above, or if that's any offense. I'm just not clear about what that means exactly.
Representative Erickson.
Madam Chair, I think that some of this Pelsby requested last year, and now we're reviewing something that we did before. So I'm not sure if Pelsby wants to comment on this or not. But I would suspect that the stay of adjudication for any offense is at their disposal. So board is going to look at that. And we have had a lot of offenses listed in the section above.
And I see someone from Pelsby coming forward. Please state your name again and maybe help us out with our confusion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maria Zoliker. This is some of the language that we are working to tighten up offline. So this is ongoing conversations about how to tighten up this language, and the concern about this language, being very specific is important. So that's something that we are working on.
Thank you. Representative Erickson.
And Madam Chair, I think, and members, I think part of the confusion is that we have the 11 listed items above, and then we have this paragraph that is in addition to that, and I think that's where some of the confusion is. So as she just said, we have to tighten this up if we're going to proceed.
Representative Waslowick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just thank you for clarifying that, because I was concerned that if it didn't refer to the crimes mentioned above, that we would say any offense, and we could be talking about, I don't know what they do stays of adjudication for, but it could be a whole number of teeny tiny things to huge things. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Waslowick. Yeah, that's how it's drafted. It's anything even beyond 11 as I'm reading it. I think, Ms. Parra, is that accurate?
Madam Chair, it does say any offense, I think, without any cross-reference to the list just above in that paragraph, that it could be interpreted to mean any offense.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Waslowick. Representative Scott, and then we do have one more bill, and I want to get people on the road, so.
This is just to that point, Madam Chair, thank you. My understanding is that, again, it probably does need a citation here, but when they do a criminal background check, the only stays of adjudication they're asking to see are any that relate to a teacher being a stay of adjudication for a predatory offense. So that would probably need a cross-reference there, but that's my understanding of the law, of what they're doing here.
Representative Erickson, is that your intent, or is that actually how it's drafted?
No, that's our intent.
Okay.
Or at least it was.
I think we have a lot of questions around this, and a lot of language that may be worked on. It does have another committee's job, but I hear a lot of concern around the table, too. So, Representative Kunesh-Podein, I think you were the last one on my list.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this forward again. I know that you've been working hard on it, and I know Representative Loon did too, and our best interest is in the safety of our students. But we always have to remember, and I'm mirroring what everybody else is saying, that we're being very careful when we are bringing forward any accusations of inappropriate behavior on an adult to a child. As a teacher myself, I've seen or heard a couple examples where a word was misinterpreted, or something was overheard, and a student maybe took that in a different light, and an accusation against a teacher happened, and it was not a comfortable situation for anybody involved. And so I just want to once again say it's so important that we are being really super careful, and we're looking at all the words and this permissiveness or not permissiveness language in order to sure that we are taking into account the rights and the safety of all individuals. But I know the bottom line is that we're keeping our kids safe. So thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Representative Erickson, did you have a final word?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I think if you reread the Code of Ethics that our profession lives under, you're going to be reminded of the great responsibility that we have in the classroom, and that it is ever so important, at least it always was to me and will continue to be, that we abide by this code of professionalism to not only protect our children, but to ensure that they have an environment in which they feel that we have their best interests at heart. I always told my students every day, you're here so I can make you better. So with that, Madam Chair, I would recommend that you renew the motion to send 532 as amended to the Ways and Means Committee.
The motion has been set to send House File 532 as amended to the Ways and Means Committee. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The motion prevails. It's on its way to Ways and Means. Okay, we have got one more bill. We're almost right on time. And we want to make sure people get on the road because it's getting pretty snowy out there. So, Representative Erdahl, how bad was it when you walked over to let your dog out?
Snowy.
Snowy. That's a really good description. All right.
They could have minor meteorology.
Representative Kunesh-Podein, it looks like we're getting all situated here. Okay, Representative Kunesh-Podein, would you like to move your bill before us? And
Yes,
it's-
Madam Chair, I'd like to move House File 1566 forward for possible inclusion
Actually, it has to head to Ways and Means. I
on
believe.
its way to Ways and Means
Yes.
then.
Thank you. Representative Kunesh-Podein, your bill is before us. Would you like to proceed?
Yes, I do have one amendment first, if I may.
Go ahead and describe your amendment. I believe, which one is it, A1 or A2?
A2, please.
So Representative Kunesh-Podein moves the A2 amendment. Would you like to describe your amendment?
What this amendment does is on page 2, line 25, it deletes everything after the period there, and it deletes lines 26 and 27 to allow school districts a little more flexibility about when they would incorporate this curriculum into the health or whatever area that they want to present this information.
Thank you, Representative Kunesh-Podein. So Representative Kunesh-Podein has moved the A2 amendment. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The A2 amendment passes, is adopted, and why don't you proceed with the bill as it's in the shape you would like?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill addresses the opioid epidemic at the maybe middle school, high school level. We're all aware of the opioid epidemic that we found ourselves mired in, and it's not just in Minnesota, but across the country. Every day, 4,000 teens between the age of 12 and 17 try illicit drugs for the first time. And prescription drugs are the current drug of choice among our 12 and 13-year-old kids. Unfortunately, 1 in 5 teens have misused prescription drugs that they are able to get their hands on, and 90% of the addicts report that they started using drugs before the age of 15. The highest rate for heroin addiction is among 18 and 25-year-olds in the U.S. Many of these kids start using addictive substances before the age of 15 and are 6.5 times as likely to develop a substance use disorder as those who delayed using it till 21 or older. Prescription drugs are abused by teens more often than cocaine, heroin, ecstasy, and methamphetamine combined, and 61% of all drug overdoses include heroin or prescription pain medication. Between 2007 and 2011, the number of opioid-related emergency room visits surpassed all other drug-related emergencies, and it's 2017, and it continues to rise. Today, I would like to bring to you Jake's Law, House File 1522, a request for inclusion and funding for an evidence-based substance misuse prevention instruction program. This bill requires school districts to include substance misuse prevention instruction in the health curriculum across grade levels and encourages districts, charter schools, and tribal contract schools to integrate substance misuse prevention instruction into existing curriculum and programs. We are also asking for funds to expand and continue an already successful curriculum across the state. Jake's Law adoption is extremely important because currently each Minnesota school district chooses their own curriculum, the intensity, the frequency of instruction, and subject areas creating a large vacuum for disproportionate and inconsistent learning efficacy as it pertains to substance misuse all across the Minnesota. Taken from the website for Jake's site is the quote, "If we are really passionate in eradicating teenage substance misuse, we must have a more intentional approach and standardized system for the delivery of substance misuse prevention instruction throughout Minnesota education." And I mentioned the For Jake's Sake website. It's a foundation. The founder is sitting next to me here on the left, Sherry Shumas. Sherry lost her son to opioid overdose. And as a consequence, she has devoted all of her time and energy outside of her work to creating this foundation with the plan to create a curriculum that will easily be used in schools to help kids understand the really tragedy of even trying the drug, because we know that oftentimes one is enough to get a kid addicted. So this bill is named after her son Jake, and we've heard the stories again and again. Just like Jake lost the fight against his addiction just months after his initial introduction to heroin. As a result, Shuri and her family, the community, have created a foundation in order to share their well-studied, science-based, incredibly successful curriculum. And the real beauty of this is that while the foundation is asking for the financial and the support of the state to continue a curriculum that they have already developed and have implemented into a number of schools. They had their first pilot session this past fall, and the results are just absolutely fabulous. And so I would like to turn it over to Sherry and let her introduce herself and tell you about the program.
All right, thank you. Do you want to state your name for the record and please proceed?
My name is Sherry Schmaus. I lost my son Jake to a heroin overdose in 2013 at the young age of 21. In honor of Jake, we started For Jake's Sake Foundation to bring awareness to the community regarding the dangers and opiate and heroin use. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Jake. Jake's birthday was yesterday. It was a very hard day. Jake would have been 27 years old. The day my husband and I brought Jake home from the hospital on a frosty winter day, and for some odd reason there was a big, beautiful rainbow in the sky. I knew then and there that Jake's life would replicate the rainbow and he would be something of magnificence. Turns out I was right. Jake was the kindest child with the most gentle heart. He grew up watching Barney, the big purple dinosaur, and loved to spend Saturday mornings watching Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers. Jake had a sweet gentleness to him that made him so easy to love. Jake, like many children, had an innocence about him that brought out the happiness and love from his family and friends. Jake and his brother Josh were inseparable. They grew up loving each other, and we were each other's best friends. Jake had beautiful blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes, and that smile, a gorgeous smile that lit up a room he was in. As Jake got older and started school, it became very clear he was a kid with many talents. Jake began to shine as an athlete and as a student. Teachers loved him, and so did his coaches. He was an excellent football player and developed a real love for basketball. As he graduated from St. Francis, it seemed as if the possibilities were endless for the fantastic life this kid could have. Jake was going places. He was attending college, and he had one said to me he wanted to be a teacher. He was so extremely smart and was on the path to achieving greatness. For Jake, the possibilities were endless until he tried heroin. The last 9 months of Jake's life were a struggle. In August of 2012, we were shocked to learn of his addiction to heroin. It didn't seem possible that someone with so many strengths and gifts could fall victim to such a powerful and evil drug. He had an amazing family and support system. He had many good friends and opportunities. Jake worked hard to beat the addiction through various treatment programs. In May of 2013, just months after we learned of his addiction, Jake lost that fight. Just when we thought he was on the path to recovery and had more than 60 days clean, heroin took him took him from us, there are no more chances. Jake will never be able to walk down the aisle and get married. He will never have children. He will never attend his brother's wedding as best man. And he will never have a career or be able to make the impact on the world that he was meant to make. Jake was a son, a brother, a grandson, a nephew, a cousin, and an uncle, and a really good friend to many. He was kind, gentle, sweet, intelligent, compassionate, creative, unique, and ambitious. Jake said he wanted to be a teacher. With this bill, I honestly believe this is Jake's way of becoming a teacher. The bill will introduce education to Minnesota school districts and will provide education regarding heroin and opiates to teens that are in an impressionable age. Jake lost his chance to teach. Please support this bill so it can do the teaching for him and make the impact on the world he has meant to make.
Thank you so much, Ms. Smith. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And please state your name for the record and proceed.
My name is Jonathan Raylander. I just wanted to emphasize that Sherry could have done what a lot of people do when they're faced with this situation. It would have been very easy for Sherry to curl up in a ball and just lock out the rest of the world. Instead, she decided to do something with her sadness and her anger. And she created this foundation. She's had some help along the way. One of them, a key person named Carla, is not able to be with us today, but she has helped implement this curriculum and did the research for it. They've implemented this pilot program in several schools. And one of the best things about it is that both the teachers and the students seem to like it. They do a survey after each session is done, and over 80% have said that it was beneficial. Most of them, excuse me, most of them have said that they either didn't have any awareness or only had some. That while they had certainly heard of heroin or something like that through classes, the benefits of the curriculum that are being proposed here go into the actual mechanics of it, how it changes the brain, introducing personal stories, and making sure that the point is made. Generally, what has been in the past is over the 6 years that constitute middle school through high school, they get possibly 1 to up to 2.5 hours worth of talk about drugs in general. It's not nearly enough. This drug rewires the brain. You are not the same person after you've tried it. Whether you survive your first initial try or not, it takes over you. Jake was an intelligent kid, popular kid. He wasn't an outsider who needed some kind of thrill. This could have been anybody. My own daughter is about to turn 13. She's had kids in her own school face this. So when we're, excuse me, sorry. I'm Sherry's coworker. I was with her the day that she got the call that her son was dead. And I knew that we couldn't stop and not do anything. So that's why we got the ball rolling. When Sherry was ready, I introduced her to Mary, and we wrote the bill that's here before you. Now, it's been through some minor revisions over the years. We wanted to get this going about 3 years ago, but it's here before you now. And so while we're open to answering any questions you have, we're really looking forward to having this move on to Ways and Means and take the next step in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kunesh-Podein, any other comments? And then we'll see if there is, first, is there any other testifiers in the audience? Oh, sorry, Representative Kunesh-Podein, you have 2 more testifiers? Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. I should have looked
I
at the
do.
list. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Absolutely. My name is Raina Meyer. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I have a high school senior from Edina, and I attend Minnesota Online High School. I also attend Hamline University as a PSEO student. I am a 3rd Congressional District member of the Minnesota Youth Council, and I am happy to be here today in enthusiastic support of House File 1566, a bill that, if passed, I believe will play a major role in curbing the opioid epidemic by educating students on the dangers of opioid abuse. As a high school senior, I have received shockingly a small amount of education on opioids and their extremely addictive nature, despite the epidemic that continues to plague our nation. In 6th grade, I received approximately 1 hour of general information designed to deter students from drug use as a whole, and in my sophomore year of high school, I received a few hours of very general information once again. Drug usage, specifically opioid usage, in my generation has become alarmingly normalized. I distinctly remember walking down the crowded hallway of a public middle school in 8th grade, hearing a passerby student casually discussing how amazing he felt when he tried heroin at a party the weekend before. This is completely unacceptable, and the fact that potentially lethal drugs are not receiving proper combative teachings in schools is something we should all be extremely worried about. When I told my parents about the normalization of opioid use in schools, it was difficult for them to wrap their heads around at first. They explained that when they were in high school, it was usually a specific crowd of kids who chose to partake in this behavior. It was always a them problem. It was not affecting anyone other than that specific group. Unfortunately, this is simply not the case anymore in most schools. In addition to opioid usage becoming more normalized in party settings, it is also becoming increasingly common for teens to become addicted after being prescribed opioids after a sports injury. The pressure of continuing to play after obtaining an injury and pushing through pain without proper healing can push teen athletes to over-medicate and easily become addicted to opioids when they are prescribed. Because the brains of teens are still developing and changing, they are much more susceptible to developing addictions. This can easily occur when they are prescribed opioids in the form of medication, which can potentially lead to severe addiction and far more lethal opioids, such as heroin and fentanyl. I believe that if we had better education in schools to combat this dangerous cycle, students would be much more aware of the potential addiction that could come with opioid abuse, which would likely decrease their chances of becoming addicted at all. Seeing how this epidemic is being continued in schools with little done to stop it deeply concerns and saddens me. I believe that this piece of legislation will play an integral role in decreasing opioid abuse and provide our students with the support and knowledge they desperately need to resist the addiction that can appear so appealing. Thank you very much for your time, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. And then one more testifier. Could you please state your name for the record?
Yes. My name is Bailey Belter. I'm the manager of the Minnesota Youth Council. And I just want to thank Representative Kunesh-Podein for bringing this bill up. And before I share a testimony on behalf of a former Minnesota Youth Council member, this bill, Jake's bill, is on our policy platform for the year. So this is one of the 6 bills that our young people voted on from doing a lot of self-research and research in their community, but also with MDE's Minnesota Student Survey. So I have more copies of this if you're interested later. But again, I'm sharing a testimony on behalf of Jacob Just. He was a senior last year on the Minnesota Youth Council from Morris, Minnesota, so up north a little bit and I guess west. But he was very passionate about this bill. And he was also a student representative to the Morris Area School Board. And even though he's in college right now, he gave me permission to share this. So I will be reading it from his perspective. So when I say I, it's Jacob. Dear members of the committee, I'm writing in support of House File 1566. I currently, or last year, served on the Minnesota Youth Council Committee representing Minnesota's 7th Congressional District. I also serve as the student representative to the Morris Area School Board. As all of us know, the opioid epidemic has reached extremely devastating levels. Individuals of all ages are falling victim to these dangerous drugs, including young people. Youth from urban, suburban, and rural areas are not being properly educated on the dangers of these drugs. As a high school student, I have taken 2 health classes. A wide array of topics were discussed, but opioid prevention did not receive the attention that it desperately needs. Just like sex education, tobacco and alcohol use, opioid and other drug prevention should be taught at great lengths and in an effective manner in all schools across the state. House File 1566 allows funds for Jake's Sake Foundation so grants can be given to schools to educate students on drug use and thus providing highly researched education methods to teachers and students alike. The individuals from the foundation are highly educated on opioid prevention and personally know the effects that it has on youth, families, and communities. Coming from rural Minnesota, I personally know what it's like to lose a member of our community from opioid addiction. No one should feel that pain, especially when it can be prevented. And prevention, of course, starts with education. It is vital that misuse education is taught at a young age and before it becomes too late. No one has to lose their lives due to opioids and other drug misuse. Some things are not easily preventable, but opioid and drug abuse can be. With the proper education of the effects of drugs, we can stop these evil killers and protect everyone in our community, particularly, again, young people. I encourage you to support this bill in the committee process and on the floors of both the House and Senate, and urge for the governor's signature. Sincerely, Jacob Just. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Belter, and thank you, Ms. Meyer. And thank you for all the work the Minnesota Youth Council does on being active, engaged in policy and furthering things for our youth and the youth across the state that are on the Minnesota Youth Council. You never cease to amaze me, so thank you. Representative Kunesh-Podein, did you have any comments? I didn't think I saw any. Was there anyone else in the room that wanted to testify for or against? No? Representative Kunesh-Podein, did you have some comments before we go to member questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all of you who came today to testify. I know it's not an easy thing to do. Members, you all have a number of letters of support for this initiative. One of the areas that the pilot programs went through were up near the Duluth area, and there's a letter in here from the Chief of Police in support of Jake's bill. And it's important to remember that St. Louis County, and we heard this in HHS just the other day, is the second highest rate of opioid deaths per capita in Minnesota. And they were very pleased with the pilot program and the outcome that was received after doing the curriculum. And so I would encourage you to look at this. It's a tough situation out there this day with kids. We're always trying to keep them safe, be one step ahead of them. And this is an opportunity to open up those lines of conversation once again on a very painful subject. And we have an opportunity to do some prevention here. And I would encourage all of you to support this bill and move it along, Ms. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Kunesh-Podein. Do I have any questions at the table? Representative Verdal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Kunesh-Podein, does this, it affects the curriculum is for opioids and for heroin, any other drugs?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, it does. It's pretty all-encompassing around addiction and addictive chemicals and ways to address it and prevent it.
Representative Verdal, follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that's very important. I think this is a very important piece of legislation. I just do want to emphasize that particularly in greater Minnesota, addiction to meth is a huge problem. And even though opioids, yes, that's a big problem. If you were to ask many sheriffs in greater Minnesota, they would talk about meth as being number one.
Thank you, Representative Verdal. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to thank Sherry for being here and doing what you've done. As your friend there, your coworker said, it's some unthinkable situation that every parent would consider a nightmare. And so thank you for having the courage to do what you're doing, and thank you to your coworker for stepping alongside you and probably giving you that kick. Let's keep going. Let's make a difference and make something good come of Jake's death. And I'm sure you miss him every day. And my deepest condolences. I have a son about that age, and it's a really hard testimony to listen to, but thank you for being here.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? Representative Erickson.
Well, just a comment. We did hear this bill last year. We included it in the omnibus bill, and unfortunately it was vetoed, but I'm glad we can go forth this year.
Thank you. Representative Pryor.
Madam Chair, Representative Kunesh-Podein, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I think that it's good that we have learned from our mistakes of the past, that when drug problems were affecting our African-American populations, that instead of finding help for them, we put a war on drugs against them and jailed them. And for us to have learned from that, to see that drug problems people should get help, that addiction is a real thing. And so I'm really glad that we've learned from our mistakes of the past and that we're doing something different now. So thank you for bringing this forward, and thank you for the testimonies today. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Representative Pryor. Any further comments or questions? Representative Bierman.
Madam Chair, and to all the testifiers, I also want to express my sincere thanks for being here, because it's your testimony, your work on this issue that will drive us forward to do things on the education side, which, as was mentioned, knowledge will create the prevention that we need. So I appreciate all of your testimony, and we're working on other parts of this opioid issue as far as getting funding from pharmaceuticals, et cetera. We're working on all of those things, but this education piece is extremely important, and it affects all the communities that we live in, and we're far from, we're in the peak of it now. And it's not only opioids, but as was mentioned, it's all these other drugs, and so it's a comprehensive thing, and you guys are really helping out to do your part and help us to end it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Representative Kunesh-Podein, final words, and then we'll move the bill.
I would like to thank Sherry and John for coming in today, and for the Youth Council once again. Representative Erickson for hearing this last year and including it in your omnibus bill. And I think it's just very important that we are addressing this at a young age and doing whatever we can do to combat it.
Thank you, Representative Kunesh-Podein. And with that, I'll move House File 1516 as amended to the Ways and Means Committee. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion is adopted. Thank you, and thank you for coming here tonight. Now, we got some quick housekeeping to do before we leave. Has anybody had a chance to review the minutes since we've all been here together all day?
I haven't, but I
Representative Gruenhagen, would you like to move the minutes, sir?
Yes.
Representative Gruenhagen moves the minutes for Wednesday, February 27th for approval. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The minutes are adopted. Okay, and then just for your, for what next week looks like, and things are getting posted, I think we've posted the agendas through Tuesday. The only addition I have on Tuesday is we do have the governor's policy language. It'll be online on Monday, but I will try to see what I can do to, not sure how we can get it to you quicker than that, but we'll try to maybe figure something out. And then Monday, we are meeting starting at 10 a.m. And we got the we got time extended a little bit in case we go long. Hopefully we won't, but we have until 12:30 on Monday, 10 a.m. to 12:30 on Monday here in this room. Tuesday, we're meeting during our regular time here, and then we're going to have one bill up in the evening from 6:30 to 10 p.m., the press freedom bill, but if we don't finish our other work on the agenda, that'll roll into the evening too. Wednesday, we're meeting at our regular time. And I have not finalized that agenda yet, but we have the room at 6:30 in the evening if we need to. And yes, you're seeing a pattern. I like to hoard rooms. And then Friday, we'll be meeting 8:30 to 10 a.m. so we can get people on the road and maybe have a little bit longer weekend before we strap in and go into the next week. So I promise you, these next 2 weeks are going to be a little crazy, but then after that, things look a lot easier for this committee alone. Representative Gruenhagen.
How's your dad doing?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. He's doing great, and he's at home recovering. So thank you. In fact, I texted him this morning to say if he needed some scintillating TV watching or to help him fall asleep, that we were going to be on Minnesota Channel 2-2. So I'll have to see what my review is because he was a former teacher as well. So thank you, and with that, we are adjourned.